Welcome to part 2 of how to do everything with the TRAKTOR Kontrol S4. I'm not going to waste any time talking, let's just get into it. Alright, now let's start playing some music and talk about how to play our songs, maybe a little bit on how to beat match them, and how to do smooth transitions from one song to another. So I'm going to find a song that I want to play here. I'm just going to load it. I push the browse encoder to load it into the deck here, and I'm going to play it and start bringing the volume fader up. Okay. All right, so I'm going to use my gain and just make sure I have a good level here. All right, so now that the deck is playing, so what is a DJ's job? So a DJ's job is to, besides picking good music and playing it in a good order, is to also do smooth transitions. And to do that, I have some tools at my disposal here, such as volume fader, gain, and EQ. So I'm just gonna start with a simple volume fader transition. When I'm DJing and beat matching, I like to think of like two cars driving down the road next to each other. And I want to basically make these cars drive at the same speed and next to each other. So if one falls behind, I got to give it a little nudge forward, right? But the first step to that is getting the songs at the same speed. So I mentioned before that I have the tempo fader here, which I can use to slow down or speed up the deck. So in the deck or on the controller, I can see that this song is playing at 115.07 BPM. I could get really in-depth in beat matching, but that's not what this tutorial is about. The song's at 115.07. I'm gonna use deck B's tempo fader to adjust it so the BPMs are exactly the same. So right about here. Okay, so while this song's playing, I'm listening to the song and I'm counting the beats. So I'm listening, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So I'm basically gonna wait for a very strong beat. So like the first beat of a section, that's called the 1, or the first beat of a phrase. So a good place to start the next song is usually the first beat after a breakdown, or typically one of the last breakdowns. So I'm actually gonna skip through this song a little bit, and I can actually do that just by clicking on the waveform here. All right, so let's skip to one of these last breakdowns here. All right, we're in the breakdown. I'm counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, here we go, boom. Now I'm listening to deck B in my headphones. I have the Q button turned on, and I have the mix knob turned to the left, right? So I'm only hearing this deck. Okay, so while the deck is playing, what I'm doing is we have them at the same speed. I just need to give them a little bit of a nudge to get them lined up. I can do that using the outer jog wheels. So if I push the outer jog wheel forward, that's like pushing the car forward. Or if I pull it back, it's like tapping the brakes, right? So I'm gonna just kind of push and pull until I hear the beats sound perfectly in time. Okay, so, and once I have them in time, I'm gonna start fading the song in. Now I have both songs playing together. Maybe bump up the gain of this one. They sound great together. Now I'll just kind of fade deck A out. All right, so we just did our first transition. Woohoo! Something like that. Okay, so now I just showed you how to do a simple volume transition, and I talked a little bit about how to do pushing and pulling using the jog wheels. while I was doing that, I was mixing in my headphones and I was kind of beat matching in my headphones. Now, I wouldn't normally do this in a normal club situation, but just so you can hear exactly what's going on in my headphones, I'm going to show you how to push and pull and let you hear the effect of what happens when I'm nudging the jog wheels forwards and backwards. Fading it in. Okay, so now I'm going to take the tempo fader and make these songs the same BPM. Okay, pretty close here. And now I'm going to find the first beat. Finding that first kick drum, I hit Q. And I'm tapping the Q button to the beat, and on the one I'm going to hit play. All right, you can hear how something's off, right? They're the same BPM, but it sounds like a train wreck. So I'm going to nudge forwards on the outer jog wheel until they sound like they're in time. Sounds good, right? Off. On, off, on. Now I'm just going to talk real quickly about beat matching and like what DJs are doing when they're beat matching. So some DJs don't like to look at BPMs, and they don't like using the dreaded sync button, which we're going to talk about next. They like to beat match by ear, right? That's what DJs had to do in the vinyl days. We had to DJ by ear and really feel the beat and match the beats, right? What I'm kind of doing is, let's say we have this song playing here in deck B. What I'm doing in my headphones, I'm going to the one. I'm going to use my Q feature to I'm going to find that first beat. Right, there it is. I hit Q to mark that first beat. So what I'm going to kind of do here is while I'm listening to the song, I'm going to drop on the one, and I'm using a combination of the tempo fader to match the BPM by ear, and I'm using the jog wheels to kind of push and pull. So I'm waiting for the one here. And I'm going to turn the volume fader up so you can hear what I'm doing while I'm beat matching. So I'm pushing, right? So it's starting to go too fast, right? So I need to slow it down and nudge. Right, so I'm doing a combination of pushing and pulling and adjusting the fader. Right, you can hear it's going too slow. It's like patting your stomach and rubbing your head, or the other way around. All right, so that's just a general overview. We're just breaking the iceberg of how to beat match. Some DJs like to beat match. Some DJs like to use the tempo fader to match the BPMs, and some people use sync. But now at this point, everybody who is watching this video knows how to play one song, fade into another song, and just do simple transitions. And sometimes that's all you need. And next we're going to talk about how to sync our tracks. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so now we talked about how to beat match our songs manually using the tempo fader and the outer jog wheels. We also talked about how to match the tempo on both decks by using the BPMs on the displays and the tempo faders to match the BPMs. And now we're going to start talking about how to easily sync our tracks. The first is the master clock. What is the master clock? Traktor has a master clock, and either the deck can be the master clock or the master clock can be the master clock, but something has to be the master clock, and that's used as the reference for anything to sync to, including track decks or loops, effects. Everything is going to sync to this master clock. If you look up here in the master clock section of Traktor, you can see I have this button called Auto turned on. And this is something that's really important to know, and a lot of people don't even know this exists. So what auto mode means is whatever deck has been playing the longest is going to be the master clock. So as soon as I stop one deck, it automatically switches the other deck to be the master clock, and then everything's going to sync to that. And the other mode, if I turn auto off, that means that now the master clock is the master. And additionally, if I want to, I can manually change the master clock to a deck just by clicking on the master button on the deck. So I can manually set the master clock. All right, but the simplest way to play in Traktor, and the most intuitive way, in my opinion, is to use auto mode. So we don't even have to think about what the master is. Traktor does it for you. If you're using 4 decks, remix decks, stems, things like that, or Ableton Link and syncing with another DJ, maybe you want to use the master clock as the master. Now, a couple things I'm going to talk about before I start demonstrating is, first of all, the phase meter in the decks. So the phase meter, if I have both decks playing right now, you can actually hear right now in your headphones probably that this is out of time, that the 2 decks are out of time. You're going to hear it especially when this beat comes in right now. All right? So decks are playing, right? They're out of time. So as I nudge the jog wheel, notice how this bar above the deck starts moving around. That bar is telling me how in sync, not the band, or out of sync the deck is, right? So if the bar is in the middle, that means my 2 tracks are perfectly locked as far as the phase go. And as this drifts to the left, this bar drifts to the left of the center, that means I need to nudge the deck to get it in sync, right? And if this bar is to the right, like it is now, that means I need to pull back on the deck. So I'm pulling back until it gets to the middle position, and now the 2 decks are perfectly in time, right? So that's the phase meter. All right, so let's kind of go to a breakdown here. I'm gonna drop on the 1. I'm gonna wait to the first beat after the breakdown, and I'm gonna start from the first beat of the next song, the first kick drum. And you're gonna hear, I'm actually gonna mess up the tempo a little bit just to make a drastic example, and you're gonna hear when I start the song, it goes out of time, it sounds like sneakers in the dryer, right? But then I'm gonna hit this magic button called sync. And what that's gonna do, it's gonna synchronize the BPM of this deck and the phase meter of this deck to whatever is the master. Depending on what I've selected in the preferences, it might have saved that to a hot cue or not. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna listen to an audible metronome and listen to it with the track and just adjust the beat grid a little bit so that the tick lines up with the click. All right, so I'm gonna show the grid panel down here. If you don't see this, you can actually just click this arrow under the tempo fader, click grid, and this is gonna show me all my beat gridding commands, which I'll get into in a second. On the S4, we have a very easy way to edit your beat grids, and that is grid mode. So when I push the grid button, it's gonna let me hear an audible metronome over my track. Let's hear how that sounds. All right, so that sounds pretty close, like it sounds like the grid's on beat, but what I'm gonna do is while the grid button is held, I can put my finger on the top of the jog wheel and just kind of adjust it until it sounds like the beat grid is perfectly accurate. Let's just kind of jump to the meat of the song and listen to how that sounds. And I'm gonna mess it up a little bit and then bring it back on. All right, so you can hear how it's off. On. Off. So that sounds really tight, right? I like to get it so like the tick and the kick, everything's just like super tight in the pocket there. So now we've easily beat gridded our tracks. Why are we doing this exactly? So the whole point of beat gridding, it's kind of like doing the beat matching ahead of time. So if I beat grid all my songs manually, I know that I've done all the beat matching beforehand, and that when I hit sync, it's looking at the beat grid of this track and matching them together. Now, a little disclaimer about beat gridding. There's a little bit of a limitation with Traktor. So if you beat grid things manually, which I just did using a metronome, your beat grids are going to be about 3 or 4 nudges to the left of Traktor's auto grid, which is Traktor's automatic beat grids, which means if I beat grid everything manually, things like the pattern player or effects or Ableton Link might not be perfectly in sync. The advantage of manually beat gridding is that all of your tracks are going to be perfectly in time because you know you've done it already. So I'm going to show you another method of beat gridding here. I'm just going to mess things all up here. All right, so in the grid panel, I can actually see my BPM value here. I'm just clicking and dragging to change it. All right. So now I'm going to play the song, and this is a method of beat gridding using the tap feature. And this is for all the auto gridders out there, which will help you use Traktor's auto grid, but also kind of beat grid manually in a way. All right, so here we go. Let's turn on the metronome. Way off. So I'm gonna hit the tap button 4 times starting on the first beat. Tap, 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 tap. There you go. So what it's doing is Traktor is looking at your tap tempo and the analysis of the track, and it's figuring out where it should put the grid based on that intelligently. Okay, and you might even hear like the grids maybe just a little bit not perfect. Like that's where Traktor sets it, whereas I would set it here. There are some other tools in the grid panel as well. These arrows left and right at the top here, the top arrows will actually shift the whole grid left and right, and I'll let you hear how that sounds. So now it's off. On. And a little trick that you might not know about is if you hold the control button and push these top 2 arrows, it'll move the grid a lot faster, so you don't have to sit there and hold the button down forever. And then I can let go of the control button and then just fine adjust it. Also, for people who play maybe dubstep, some of your tracks might show up as 70 BPM versus 140 BPM. In those situations, you have the ×2 and divided by 2 buttons. So if I hit ×2, it's going to double the BPM. All right, so sometimes if I have a slow track where the metronome is just going very slow and it's hard to really fine tune and get it really perfect, I might double the BPM and then shift the grid left and right. So it just gives me more to like latch onto. And then I push the divide by 2 button to just get it back to what it is. And also, some of your tracks, let's say they show up as 123.999, for example. I'm guessing this producer didn't make the song at 0.999. In those situations, you can use the bottom 2 arrows to just kind of fine-tune the BPM and put it at an even value. Right? So you probably barely notice any difference, but where you're really going to hear the difference is at the very end of the song. So what I'll do sometimes is just go to the end of the song and then just decide if it's going to be 0.999 or 0.00. So 0.999, 0.00. So 0.00 sounds better. And then once I like what I hear, I can use the lock button, and that will lock the analysis so I can't change or delete the beat grid. It also puts a nice little lock icon next to the song so I know what I've manually beat grid and that those are safe to sync. So that's a basic overview of beat gridding and how to get your tracks to perfectly sync up to each other airtight. So happy gridding. Okay, so now that I've showed you the basic functions on how to beat grid your tracks, I'll show you a couple tools that are in the grid panel that can be very handy. If I want to set a second grid marker, like let's say some tracks might be 125 BPM, and then they have a breakdown where it slows down to 85 BPM, and then after the breakdown it goes back to 125 BPM, I can set a second grid marker just by going up to the beat here, and I can tap on the grid icon here, and now that's set a second grid marker. So when it hits that grid marker in the waveform, it's basically recalibrating the beat grid and it's going to snap right to the beat. I can delete the grid marker by clicking the trash icon here, and that deletes it. Oh no, I just deleted my other grid marker. What do I do? So that could happen, especially for those of you who save your beat marker as a hot cue. You could accidentally delete the hot cue that contains your grid marker. And now the waveform looks like this. We have a very unevenly spaced grid of white lines, and you can see they're all over the place. Now those white lines are marking transients and not beats. So to restore the beat marker, I can just click Auto. It's reanalyzing the track, and you can see it's set my grid marker back here on the 1. And actually in this case, it's not set it at the very beginning, so if I want, I can even just delete it, go up to an actual beat kick drum here, and just set a new grid marker here. And we also have in the software, if you want to turn the metronome on in the software, we have this headphone button here where I can turn the grid on and off. I can also double click on the BPM and type in the BPM if I want, but yeah, so that's beat gridding in Traktor. Now you have a new way to get all your tracks perfectly in sync with each other and perfectly in time, so get your grid on. All right, so now let's talk about EQing. Have you ever seen a DJ play and they're just turning knobs all over the place and you're wondering, what are they doing? Chances are they're probably turning EQ knobs or maybe some filters, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. So on the S4, we have 3 EQ knobs. We have low, mid, and high. You can think of these kind of like a bass or treble knob in your car, which are fun to play with. So I can turn the bass down, I can turn it up, I could emphasize it by turning it clockwise, or I can lower the bass by turning it counterclockwise. So each one of these knobs controls a specific frequency band. For example, the lows controls your low frequencies. These can be things like kick drums or sub bass, and you kind of have almost like a volume knob for everything that falls in those frequencies. The mids is going to control the level of things like vocals, horns, synthesizers, or anything that's in the mid-range. The highs are going to control high-frequency sounds, such as hi-hats, cymbals, or white noise. So I'm going to teach you all the different rules and the what to-dos and the what not to-dos with all of these. All right, so let's hear how it sounds. So before I play the song, you can notice that I have all of my EQs at the 12 o'clock position, and that's the position of the original track. It's how the track was originally produced. So if all my EQs are at 12 o'clock, the track is going to sound exactly like it was produced. If I turn it to the left, that's going to lower that frequency band, and if I turn it to the right, that's going to emphasize the frequency band. So let's hear how it sounds. First, I'll start with the bass. All right, so as I turn the bass knob down, you're going to notice that the kick drum kind of goes away. Now we're at a part with some sub bass. And you can hear that that kind of lowers too. And if I boost the bass, you can hear how the sub bass comes up, the kick drum gets a little bit louder. All right, now let's go to the mids here. So the mids I use a lot for things like vocals or synthesizers. So you can hear the vocals coming in right now. So I just turn the vocal kind of down. Or I can emphasize it by turning the knob clockwise. And you can also hear how I turned up the kind of bells and synths and things like that. Or I can even kind of isolate the vocals if I turn the bass down and the mids up. Okay, now we got the highs next. So you can hear how I'm using the highs to kind of like emphasize those hi-hats. Or if you have a track that has these kind of piercing highs, you can dull it a little bit by turning the highs to the left. You can hear how it sounds a little bit darker. There's some general rules with the EQs that you gotta follow. Generally with the bass, you don't want to turn it past 2 o'clock, definitely not more than 3 o'clock, because when you turn the bass up, you're going to notice the gain goes up, and you want to kind of control your bass so you don't clip and you don't hit the reds. And the same kind of applies for the highs. If I go past 1 or 2 o'clock with the highs, the sound can get very piercing to your ears and just very harsh. So be careful for the highs. But if you have a track that doesn't have enough highs, you can use the high to just kind of bring the high frequencies out in the track. The mids are kind of relative. I just use the mids mainly if I need to turn the vocal up, I can turn the mids up. Or if I need to turn a synth down of one track so the vocals can poke through, I can use the mids to turn that sort of synth down. All right, so now I'm going to get into a few different methods of EQing and how you can use the EQs to do smooth transitions. So let's go towards the end of the song here. And I'm going to do, first I'm going to show what's called a baseline swap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play deck A with the EQs all at 12 o'clock. And for deck B, I'm going to turn the low EQ all the way down. So what I'm going to do is, of course, I'm going to drop on the 1. I'm going to fade the song in with the volume fader. And then when I'm ready to really punch the bass in of deck B, I'm going to do what's called a baseline swap, where I turn the bass down of one deck at the same time as I'm turning the bass up of the other deck. So like this to this. Okay? So let's do it. Waiting for the 1. And to note, when you're playing a song out, it's always best to have the volume faders all the way at the top when the deck is fully live. Okay, I see the bass about to come in. Here comes my bassline swap. I just did my bassline swap. I'm fading the song out. Okay, so that's step 1, is the bassline swap. Now, something I'm going to point out, if you actually look at the Traktor software, You can actually see the frequencies of the track if you use a special waveform type. So if I go to Preferences, Decks Layout, Miscellaneous Color Mode. Under Color Mode, I can choose different colors for the waveform. Infrared, ultraviolet. So Spectrum Mode will actually show me the frequency content of the track, so I can just kind of look at the track and get a general idea of what's going on. So how the colors work is red signifies bass, blue is more for percussion, and green is for mid frequencies such as vocals or synths. So you can see there's a lot of bass in this track, but during the breakdowns I got some greenish stuff, some yellowish stuff, you know, some blue stuff towards the end where the snare drum rolls are. So that'll give you a general idea of what's going on in your track, but try not to look at your screen too much, please. Okay, so let's do another example. So now we're going to start talking about highs and how to use those. Okay, so we're going to use the same technique that we just talked about where I start with the bass all the way down, but we're additionally going to turn the highs down to about, let's say, 9 or 10 o'clock. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of dull those high frequencies down. So when I'm fading the song in, you're not hearing this like, you know, coming in. It's just less obvious that you're bringing a song in. You know, because our general vibe is we want to have a smooth transition where people almost don't even know that the transition happened. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the end of this song here, and I'm going to do a transition with the highs and the lows. I'm waiting for the one, that first kick drum after the breakdown. Okay. Now I have the highs turned down on this deck. I'm going to start fading the deck in. You can probably barely hear it, but it's almost at full volume. So I use the highs to kind of tame those tech house hi-hats so they're not so sharp. And when I'm ready, I can start fading in the highs just gradually. You can hear the synths kind of coming through. You remember our mid, our friend the mid here? We can turn the synths up or down in theory. All right. Now I have the highs both up. So you also want to be careful of balancing your EQs. So if the highs are up on one deck, you probably want to back down a little bit with the highs on the other deck. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to do my bass line swap. I'm going to wait for the one. Here we go. Maybe cut the bass for 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there we go. Now deck A looks similar to how deck B looked when I started it. The highs are at 10 o'clock, lows are all down. That's how to use the EQs. And again, with the mids, just kind of use it to taste. Use your ears. Just decide, like, is this vocal loud enough? Is it not loud? Or if you have a lot of synths and a lot of vocals in the tracks, like maybe rather than cranking the vocals up, turn the synths down so then the vocals can peek their head through. All right, now we're going to talk about the other knob that DJs love to turn. It's the filter. So a filter's job is to basically let certain frequencies come through while not allowing other frequencies. Using the filters on the S4 is very easy. Basically, we have a built-in high pass and low pass filter. In the middle of the mixer, we have the mixer effects section. And we have mixer effects knobs and a button here. Now, we're going to talk more about mixer effects later on in the video, but right now we're only using filters. So I'm going to push the filter button to activate the filter, and now all of these become filter controls. Now for each channel we have an on-off button for the filter or mixer effects. So I'm going to turn them all on. And how they work is, if the mixer effects knob is in the 12 o'clock position, that means that the track is unaffected. It's basically how it was originally produced as far as the filters go. If I turn the mixer effects knob to the right, then it becomes a high pass filter, which will basically allow the highs to come through, but it's sweeping or kind of cutting the lows as I turn to the right. And then if I turn the mixer effects knob counterclockwise, then it becomes a low pass filter where it's letting the lows come through and the highs are getting swept away as I turn it to the left. All right, so let's have a listen to how that sounds. All right. Now I'm going to turn the filter to the right. You can hear the kick drum is turned down. You also get that resonance from the filter. If I go all the way to the right, all you hear is highs. Now let's go the other way. Now all you hear is just that bass kind of coming through. It's a great effect to do like at the end of the night. Just to tease people like the night's about to end. And then bring it back in. All right, so now you should get the idea of how the filter works, how I can do a high pass filter and a low pass filter. So the filters can be used both as a sort of creative effect where you can build tension, you know, like if you have a slamming track going and you turn the filter to the right and you kind of take the kick drum away, people will put their hands in the air and, you know, they want that kick drum back. So you kind of take it away from them and then punch it right back in and they'll go crazy. And the filters can be used as sort of a functional tool or almost like a replacement for EQ. So let's say I have one deck playing, you know, the filter is going to be at 12 o'clock. The other deck, I can turn the filter up so the lows are gone. And I can sort of use it as a replacement for a baseline swap, which I just showed. Let's just do an example of that. All right, start with filter here. So notice the EQs are unchanged. I'm only using filters. That was just my little touch. All right. Now we're going to do a filter swap. All right, I'll do it one more time. You can see I can use the filter as a substitution for EQs. There's actually a couple different kinds of filters built into Traktor. Just like with the EQs, you can actually change the filter type in the preferences. So if I go to the preferences, mixer, I can change the filter type to either ladder, zone, or Z. So the ladder filter is a bit more resonant. It's a bit more obvious that you're using an effect, right? People are definitely going to hear the filter effect, you know, as I turn it up. Whereas the zone is a much more cleaner sound and warmer kind of analog filter sound. It's not as obvious. And the Z filter is an emulation of the Traktor Control Z2. So that has its own character as well. There's no right one to use. I like the latter because it's just a bit more obvious that the DJ is doing something. Definitely play around, see which ones you like. So that's the filters and how to use them. You can see that I can use them creatively or functionally as a replacement for EQs or as a tool to just make people go crazy. Take the bass away from people, give it back to them, get in there, practice with the filters, and get those hands in the air. Now let's talk about the effects in Traktor. One thing that really sets Traktor apart from other DJ software is the effects inside of it. Traktor has over 40 built-in effects that are designed in Native Instruments Reactor, from beat manglers to delays, reverbs, shimmery ice verbs, and all kinds of different effects that you can use. So basically an effect is taking the incoming audio signal and mangling it in some kind of creative way. And on the S4, we have 2 effects sections here. We have effect unit 1 and 2 that we can use to control Traktor's effects. Not to get too nerdy, but you can actually have 4 effects units in Traktor. But today we're just going to cover 2. In the software, if this is your first time opening Traktor, you might notice in the upper left and the upper right hand side of the screen, we have 3 effects in effect unit 1, which is up here, labeled with the number 1. And then on the right side, we have effect unit 2 with the number 2 here. And this only has 1 effect. So there's actually 2 different modes with effects. You have group mode and single mode. In group mode, there's 3 effects. Each effect has 1 button and 1 knob. And then you have a dry, wet knob for all 3 of those effects combined. And then in single mode, you have 1 effect with 4 buttons and 4 knobs if you want to get really advanced. But to start, I'm going to put effects unit 2 into group mode. This is probably the easiest way to control the effects. So as mentioned here, we have effects unit 1 here, effects 2 here. And for each deck, at the top of the channel strip, you can see we have a button to assign the deck to either effects unit. So for example, for deck A, I can assign it to effect unit 1, effect unit 2, or both of them. Now, since I'm in group mode in both of these effects units, I now have 6 effects that I can trigger really easily. To select the effect that we're using, we can use these drop-down menus here. And if I click the drop-down menu, you can see we have all of these effects to choose from here. So I've loaded some of my favorites right now, and I'm just going to walk you through some of them and how they work. So right now you see I have a delay, beat masher 2, and bass-o-matic on effects unit 1. I have the reverb T3, that means Traktor 3, gator, and ice verb on the right side. Before I get started and start having fun with some of these, just to explain how it works signal flow wise. So for deck A, you can see I have it assigned to both effects units, and the effects go from left to right. So for example, I have a delay going into a beat masher into the bass-o-matic. And since I have both of these units activated, it then goes into reverb T3, gator T3, and ice verb. So I have 6 effects chained. So let's get into some of my favorites. The most used effects, I would say, in Traktor are the delay T3 and the reverb T3. I love the delay T3 because with the knob, I can control the rate of the delay. In group mode, the knob is going to do a different thing for each effect. So with the delays, I have the rate with this knob, and underneath that, we have a button for each, and that is going to turn the effect on and off. So let's do a little example of the delay. And you can hear I'm using the dry wet to kind of fade in the delay. All right, now let's bring in a little bit of reverb. So on the right side, we have the reverb here. This knob is going to control basically the size of the reverb, and then I have a dry wet for the reverb as well. So I have the delay going. Now I'm bringing in some reverb. So reverb's giving this sense of space. Let's loop this. So I have this section here. Now let's introduce the gator. So I love using these effects over like synthy, droney kind of stuff. It's like a choppy effect. I'm gonna turn it on, start bringing it in. You hear how it's getting choppy. That's the gator, and with the gator, this knob controls the rate of the chopping. Now I have an ice verb over here, which is like an icy reverb. If you want to cool your dancers off, give them a little ice verb. Now another cool thing you can do with the reverb is if I put the reverb at about 1 o'clock and the dry wet about 1 o'clock, I can do reverb splashes. I just basically like double tap it on a snare. You can hear it's like a little punch of reverb. I can even, if I want to, use the effects with the filters, right? So now, something to say about the effects is we can use them in a couple different modes. We can use them in insert mode, or we can use them in post-fader mode. Post-fader mode will basically let the delay ring out. When I bring the volume fader down, it just lets the effect kind of ring out. Whereas insert mode, when you turn the volume fader down, the effect will just be cut off with the volume of the song. So just a quick example. So first I'll start in insert mode. So I'm putting on a delay here. Pull the fader down, volume's dead. Right? If I switch to post fader mode just by clicking the number 1, you can hear how the delay just kind of rings out, and it's really nice. So I like to play in post fader mode, and that can be great for transitions as well. When you're kind of coming out of one song, you can let the delay just let the song echo out into nothingness. And that's how to use the effects in group effects mode. Group effects mode are a great way to just easily control your effects and have just quick access to your favorite effects and effect parameters without doing too much thinking. Next, we're going to talk about single effects mode, which we get a bit nerdy on. Single effects are a great way to have more control over your effect. In single effects mode, we have 4 buttons and 4 knobs just to control one single effect, and you can do that with every effect in Traktor. Some of the most popular effects in single effects mode would be, for example, the delay or the reverb. So let's start with the delay T3 in single effects mode. So some of the parameters that we have to work with here, we have an on-off button to turn the effect on or off. We have a reset button, and most of the effects actually have a reset button. So if you push that, it resets everything to the default value. Then we have a freeze button that will allow the delay to the input gets frozen, so the effect just keeps going and repeating while the incoming audio is cut off. And then we have the free range button that will unsync the effects so you can actually control the rate with the knob. As far as the knobs go, we have the dry wet knob, which is the amount of the effect. We have the filter knob, which will filter the delay signal, similar to how these filters were working. We have the feedback, which is like the amount of the effect, and then we have the rate, which is you can set to like an 1/8 note, a 1/16 note, 32nd note. That's just the speed of the delay. So let's go to this crazy breakdown here and just start having some fun with the effects and seeing what they do. So first I like to set my rate where I want it. Now I'll turn the effect on, start bringing the dry wet in. And you can hear how I can change the rate without any glitch in audio. Kind of turning the filter. That's the freeze. Do a little free range action. Hear how things get really drippy really fast. Let it freeze out. That's a lot of parameters, right? It's like, what am I supposed to do? Memorize every parameter, and when I'm DJing, have to figure out which knob and where to turn it where and which buttons are on. Like, it's just too much, right? So there's a way to actually save your settings with each effect, and that's called Snapshots. So what I like to do is when I'm just at home playing around, I'll get the effect exactly where I want it, and I'm gonna get all the knobs where I want them, and also keep in mind which buttons are on and off, because those will get saved as well. So I want the delay off, I want the rate here, feedback here, filter here, right? Now, once I have the effect exactly where I want it, I can click the effect unit number and say Save Snapshot. And now that's saved all the settings that I just did. So, for example, what if I changed to a different effect, right? If I load that delay T3 up again, you can see how everything is exactly the way I saved it. So I could just jump in and just basically just turn the effect on, bring the dry wet up, and I'm ready to rock. Let's get into one more effect that's handy in single mode, and that's the turntable effects. I always see people saying they wish they had a turntable effect in Traktor that simulates a backspin or a rock. Check out the turntable effects. So I'm just gonna play the song and demonstrate some parameters and then save it. All right, so we have a rock. So this is the rock speed. This is to turn the rock on. Yeah, I like it right there. So it's like a 16th note rock. Then we have a backspin. So this controls the backspin speed. So slower, faster. Right? So just like that. So now I have all those settings saved exactly how I want it. I've saved a snapshot, and now next time I load up the turntable effects, I'm ready to rock. Get it? How many dad jokes? I'm gonna get crucified in the comments. So now I'm going to talk about the different kinds of effects that you can come across when you're going through the Traktor effects. There's many different types of effects. So the first type of effect I'm going to talk about are the beat synced effects. The beat synced effects are actually following the tempo of the master clock. So if you change the speeds, the effects are going to change speeds as well. Some examples of that would be the delay and the gator, which we talked about. Now the second type of effect that I'll demonstrate is called distortion effects. So I'm going to play a track by my boy Victor Calderone here, and we're going to have some fun with it. So one of the great distortion effects that we have to work with is called Mulholland Drive. So I'll select that here. And this is Traktor's own distortion. The next effect I'm going to talk about is the flux effect. So the flux effect, you're basically controlling the pitch of the effect with the knob. Let's select a flanger flux. I'll add a little filter here. As I move to the knob to the right, you're hearing the pitch changing. Another kind of effect that we have are called buffer effects. A great example of a buffer effect is the beat masher. So what that means is when I turn the effect on, it's basically capturing the audio at that moment, putting it into like a cache and storing it, and then you can use the knob to kind of mangle it. So let's say I want to do like an eighth note loop roll. I can use the beat masher to do that. Actually, when I pull the fader down, you can hear how it keeps going and going and going, and it'll go forever until I turn it off. All right, so now we have LFO effects. LFO is just moving things up and down. So I'm going to set the length here, turn it on. Let's go to a breakdown. You can hear how the filter is going up and down. And I can just make it faster and faster. Okay. And then we have pulse effects, which are actually modulated by the beat. So some examples of pulse effects would be flanger, phaser pulse, and filter 92 pulse. Let's do a phaser. I got the phaser pulse here. And you're going to kind of hear, let's go back to this breakdown. You're going to hear how when there's transients, it's modulating the effect. So any spike in audio is making the effect kind of duck and gets kind of crazy. Get your hands dirty, get in there and have some fun. Learn what these effects can do. Go in group mode, go in single mode. Learning the effects can really give you your own signature sound as an artist. One of the great new upgrades to the S4 Mark III is that they added a mixer effects section right here in the middle of the S4. The mixer effects behave very similarly to a lot of industry standard mixers, where it's basically a one knob, one button effect. So this is how you can use them. First, I'm actually just going to show you how you can customize which effects you have access to on the controller. So I can do that by going to the Preferences, Mixer, Mixer Effects. So you see we have 4 slots here that I can choose which effect. We have 8 mixer effects available, but only 4 of them will be triggerable on the S4. So I'm just going here. So I've selected reverb, noise, dual delay, and time gator. So the mixer effects can be amazing for build-ups and also can be great for transitions. They're post-fader, which means, if I pull the fader down or if I stop the track, the effect will continue to ring on, which will allow for just much more cool and seamless transitions. So you remember our friend the filter before? We have the filter here at the bottom, But if I want to select a mixer effect, I can either push effect select 1, 2, 3, or 4. And you can actually see the colors of the on buttons change as I select them. And we can also select mixer effects for individual channels, so some channels can be different, just by pushing and holding on any of the numbers, and then pushing the on button for the channel that I want to use that effect for. So I can turn the effect on by pushing the on button. And how they work is when I have the mixer effects knob in the middle position, the track is unaltered. And when I turn it to the right, it's basically a macro effect. So it's using two effects at once. So most of them will trigger an effect, and it will add either a high pass filter going to the right and a low pass filter to the effect going to the left. All right, so right now I have a reverb, a dotted delay, a noise effect, and a timed gator. Reverb can be great for reverb splashes or also just adding space to your mix. Here we go. So as I turn the knob to the right, the reverb gets bigger, but also hear that filter in action too, cutting the bass, which is a great hack for effects because you don't want to be putting all this reverb on the bass. And something I like to do is I'll actually turn the knob up and I'll just hit the on button when I want to do a reverb splash. Okay, so the dotted delay adds a 2-pulse delay to the track. All right, and let's hear that in action and hear how it can be used to make a good transition. So I'm going to bring in this second track.
I've got the way of a killer fate. I got the day and I'm not gonna be late. I got the place of the sinners and saints, and I'm here and I'm now and I'm breaking out.
You can hear I got that nice delay fade out. Okay. And then we got our third effect is the noise effect. And this is one of the only effects that we have in Traktor besides the gator that actually generates its own noise. So without any music playing, I can do noise buildups. And if you want to get really geeky, you can add some effects over this effect. So for example, if I assign deck B to the effects unit, I can add a delay over the noise. Let's hear that in action. All right, and the last effect that we have to work with is the timing gator. And this is similar to the gator that I showed you before, except it also has a filter built in. And if I turn it to the left, we got like a low pass filter with the gator. And it's an 1/8 note to the left, 1/16 note to the right. All right, so those are the mixer effects knobs on the S4. Get in there, have some fun, make some exciting build-ups, exciting breakdowns, some great transitions.